Good evening. Good evening, everyone that's on. Just going to get started now. I think I just sent the live stream to the local TV channels. If anyone of you are at home and have the opportunity to also turn on your TV and go to the local TV channel, just let me know if you're seeing it. That'd be great. But from my end, it looks like the live stream or the broadcast to local TV is up and running. Also, can you all hear me?
Yes, Tony.
Thank you. Michelle, can I also ask, can you see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining tonight. This is the second informational session and final informational session. However, on Friday from 10 to noon, I will hold open office hours for anyone that would like to stop in and talk one-on-one or in a small group. Last Friday, I had a few visitors, and there were excellent, productive conversations. So I encourage you, if you feel, uncomfortable with speaking up during this public meeting, to stop by the town hall on Friday between 10 and noon. Also, if you are unable to be here tonight. What I want to use this time for is to kind of go through different articles that are going to be presented at town meeting. I don't have all of the articles on this slideshow. So if you have any additional articles you want to discuss or want more information about, I'm happy to do that as well. I start by going through some of the budget and then get through some other articles. And, really, I try for this to be informal so that folks, feel free to. Oh, I just found the chat. Okay, Brendan, thank you. Looks like we are live streaming on the local TV channel. I encourage you to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have any question or want to participate in the conversation at any point. This is, like I said, my goal here is to prepare you, the voters, for town meeting on Saturday. This process of town meeting starts back in November. It involves many, many people. The finance director, myself, the board of selectmen, the finance committee, the community preservation committee, other committees that might be submitting articles or applications to the community preservation committee, the planning board, as if there's any zoning articles where they have a hearing and submit a recommendation. So many volunteers, many people are involved. And as I mentioned, it starts back in November. Around that time, the Community Preservation Committee is starting to meet to have public meetings about their process and educate folks on the application, how to apply, what type of applications they consider under their rules and regulations. And at about the same time, myself and the finance director and all the department heads and or committee chairs, if necessary, start to look at budget, putting in requests for next year's budget. We start the process by looking at how much money the town has to work with next year. So it's not I've had this question before. It's not a situation where we're taking money raised in the current fiscal year and spending it in the following fiscal year. The money we raise next fiscal year is spent next fiscal year. And the fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So in May, this weekend, we're voting on the budget and articles that essentially go into effect July 1st. We look at our revenues. We try to estimate our revenues to understand what our capabilities are going to be next year. So the first thing we look at, because most of our revenues is dependent on property tax, we look at the Prop 2.5 increase. So state law Prop 2.5 limits the amount of revenue that the town can bring in on property taxes year after year. It can only increase by 2.5%. There's much more to it, but I'm trying to keep things simple. When we look at that number and we include the debt shift, the total amount of dollars that we're bringing in through under Prop 2.5 compared to last year is only $462,000 more than last year. So our budget, our omnibus budget, is around $15 or $16 million. So only about $500,000 more are we estimating to come in through property taxes to be spent next year. We also have local revenues. So those are, building permit fees, mooring fees, other types of local revenues. We estimate that at about $158,000. And then we also get some money from the state budget, a whopping $23,757. So in total, our revenue increase next year compared to last year is just under $700,000. And so from there, that kind of gives us what we are able to spend next year. Now, I'm going to get into it in this next bullet or next heading. When we're looking at revenues, we look at them in two different buckets. We have revenues that are very confident. That's your taxes and your local revenues and your state budget. And then we have another bucket, which is called free cash. Free cash isn't free. It's not cash. And it's unknown what that dollar amount is going to be from year to year. What it actually is a calculation of not the current fiscal year that we're in, but last fiscal year that ended on June 30th of last year. At the end of the year, did we spend less money than we expected to spend? And did we bring in more money than we expected to bring in? And if the answer is yes to both of those or either of those, they combine to create free cash, which can then be used next fiscal year, but we vote on it in this weekend. So it can be confusing. I'll explain it just again. At the end of last fiscal year, which ended on June 30th, if we had leftover money and we brought in more revenues than we expected, that money is called free cash, and it gets added to what we are able to spend next year, starting this July 1st. That dollar amount is, as I said, it's almost like what I like to call it as a Christmas bonus. You don't know how much it's going to be. You don't know if it's going to come in every year. And so you don't want to fund annual operating expenses with that type of money. What you want to use that money for is one-time purchases, funding capital projects, or replenishing other reserves like savings. And if you have additional money on top of that, put it towards paying a little bit more debt than you are actually required to pay. So even though we have, as you can see down below, $1.6 million in free cash, that is actually significantly higher compared to last year. And a part of the reason of that is because of the Howe estate that sold in the previous fiscal year unexpectedly, included a lot of deferred taxes and interest that was owed to the town, were produced to the town through that sale, which is a good thing. But we didn't estimate that revenue for that fiscal year. It was unknown to happen. So because it did happen, it became unexpected revenue that fell to free cash, which we now get to use in next fiscal year's budget. Again, we don't want to use that money to spend on operational expenses. If you got a $10,000 Christmas bonus, you're not going to buy something that's going to cost you $10,000 a year for the next 5 years, because you don't know if you're getting a $10,000 Christmas bonus again in the next 4 years. But you might go buy something that's $10,000. You might put it into your savings account. You might pay off a credit card. It's the same concept. Back to the headline above, we, on that more confident revenue, which totaled just under $700,000, when we put out our memo to department heads and said, tell us what you need next year, their total request came into 1.1 million. So what we do is we look at that 1.1 million. We determine what of it is a one-time capital purchase and could be used, if it's needed, can we use free cash to pay for it? And what of it is operational annual expense? And essentially, we have to whittle those requests down to fit within that $693,179 budget. So after going through that process, the budget that you guys are going to be voting on at town meeting this Saturday it represents a very minimal increase over last year, 3.6% increase in the operational budget of the town. Again, that's limited because of the very limited revenues that we anticipate next year. Unfortunately, I think the issue that we're having going into this next year is we're kind of in this gap year of revenue because the Coast Guard housing properties are no longer being rented. They've been demolished, or most of them have been. And so we're not bringing in revenue through that rent, and they haven't been sold yet. Once they get sold and developed, you'll have tax revenue coming in from those properties. But we're kind of in this in-between year of funding. So that's probably part of what our issue is. The other is at last year's town meeting, the town voted to restrict short-term rentals. And short-term rentals came with a local tax option that we approved in a previous year. And so the anticipated revenue that was in an unrestricted format, somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000, is now more likely to be closer to $20,000 to $40,000. So we're now experiencing somewhat of a decrease in that revenue stream. So that's okay. We have to kind of figure out ways to adjust for that. But those are some of the, levers that are adding pressure to this year's budget and scenario. So as you can see here, the 3.6% increase is broken down into different categories. General government only increasing operationally less than $3,000. Public safety, $88,715, a 2.7% increase. School, a 4.2% increase, which accounts for $190,000. Public works is actually, you'll see a little decrease there, It's actually what we did was we shifted some of their operational expenses into the enterprise account in order to balance our budget. The culture and recreation has a 2.5% increase. So that's like council on aging, library, parks and rec, sailing program, things of that nature. And the largest percentage increase or hardest hit that we experienced this year is insurance and benefits. $230,522 or a 9.1% increase. I think, we're feeling the same effect that I think many residents are feeling in their personal lives, where insurance, property insurance, liabilities, health insurance, all of it going through the roof. And we're unfortunately we're experiencing the same thing here, and we need those things. We have to fund them, but it took up a large, of just under $500,000, 230 of it is insurance and benefits. So a huge cost impact to our what we're able to increase going into next year. Water and sewer enterprise, a minimal increase, and rubbish enterprise minimum increase. Both of those are largely due to assessment. So under water, it's our MWRA assessment. Under sewer, it's our Lynn Water and Sewer assessment. And under trash, it's our contract with Waste Management, who does our collection. As those contracts increase, it adds a burden to our enterprise accounts. I'll say the good thing, the positive on water and sewer is water has only increased, the rate has only increased minimally in the last 2 years, and sewer hasn't increased at all in the last 2 years, the rates. We're actually, if you compare us to other communities, we're trending upward at a slower pace when it comes to our water sewer rates. Now, the next slide here, it talks about funding reserve accounts to improve the town's bond rating, and paying down debt. The town's bond rating is just like your credit score. The better our bond rating, the better interest rates and ability we have in getting borrowing. And that bond rating, just like your credit score, is dependent on certain liabilities of our budget. So if you have a lot of outstanding debt, if you're not bringing in enough money to cover the cost of that debt, if you don't have a lot of money in your savings, if you don't have, those sorts of things can negatively impact your credit score. Same with the town. So our stabilization fund, which is our savings account, was, I think when I started in 2018, the town hadn't regularly invested into the stabilization fund, which, jeopardized the town's bond rating. And it only had, I think, less than $300,000 in it. Now, with this year, with $200,000 being appropriated, if approved, for the first time in town history, we'll have more than $1 million in that account. That is a huge goal of ours. Ultimately, we want to get to 10% of our total budget, so 1.5 million or 1.6 million. You really want a minimum of 5%, which we've met that goal, but we want to keep going. And this is, I got to thank the town meeting voters and the finance committee for making this a priority, because it's huge. It's very important for our bond rating. Our OPEB account, which is other post-employment benefits, that's a liability on the town, is another account that when I first started here only had, I think, $3,000 in it. And we've contributed $25,000 a year. And if approved this year, it'll be over $153,000. So by funding both of those items, we are securing our bond rating, which is very good at the time, which is probably, I think it's the highest it can be for a budget of our size. So that's important because it saves us money in the long run. appropriately paying down debt to save the town long-term costs. So when we first start to develop our budget, we look at how much debt we need to pay in the upcoming year. And we put that amount into that column of our budget. And then we go through everything else and meet all our priorities. We talk to the department heads. We figure out what we're hoping to accomplish this year. And if there's leftover money at the end, we revisit that budget, that debt line item, and add to it. Because as you would yourself, if you had multiple credit cards with outstanding debt, you'd want to, if you have the ability to make an extra payment, it's going right to the principal instead of it being going towards interest. So this year with this budget, and we've done this over the last, I think, 5 budgets now, we're going to be paying approximately $100,000 more than the minimum amount due, which is it's a total appropriation of $4.2 million. So a little bit more than what we owe. It's not a huge amount, but it's what we can do this year, and it's more than our minimum. So it'll help pay down principal, which reduces interest in the long run. So it's a good budgeting practice. Here's some items, featured capital items that I wanted to pull out of the warrant to make sure you're aware of them. All of these items we are attempting to fund with either completely funded with free cash or at least a portion of it funded with free cash. So to limit the amount of borrowing, because with borrowing comes interest. With the fire department, a new ambulance is needed. Its cost is $450,000, and it's an expensive piece of equipment, but it is a revenue generator for the town, and obviously a core public safety principle of ours. The issue with the ambulance is that the estimated build time is 28 months, and our current ambulance is around 8 years old. So we're asking for the town to support this article to fund the purchase of a new ambulance, so that when it is ready to go into service, it's likely that our current ambulance is going to be 10 years old. And if our current ambulance doesn't meet certain inspections by the state, it'll be pulled out of service. So we're trying to be proactive here, be ahead of the time, because we know how long it's going to take for a new ambulance to be provided to the town. And we're proposing a funding split of $185,000 from free cash, and then borrowing the rest of $265,000. Also, the fire department, the SCBA cylinders, this is the breathing device that the firefighters have on their back while they're fighting fires, helps them breathe through the toxic chemicals that they're exposed to. They are 15 years old, and they have to be removed from service next year. We have 53 of them. It's an expensive item, and to replace them, it's going to cost $63,000. But we're funding it completely with free cash. There's no borrowing. It doesn't pull from operational expenses. It's a good use of those funds. Water meters. This is a massive project that the town has to take on. We have, looks like my bullet here is cut off. I'm sorry. It's $370,000 is what we're proposing. Now, it's just for phase 1. The water meters that are in your home are about 10 years old. They're mechanical devices that we have to read by driving up and down every street in order to get the readings. and they are reaching the end of their life. To replace every meter in town, plus the program, the hardware and the software associated with the programming, probably going to cost us anywhere from $800,000 to $1 million. We obviously cannot accomplish that in one fiscal year. So our thought is to break it down into 3 or 4 fiscal years. And the most expensive year is the first because of the additional costs of the programming, the software, and the hardware. And then year after year, what we would be doing is purchasing additional new meters and paying to get them installed in your homes. The nice thing about these meters is that the new technology, they have a 20-year lifespan, so they last twice as long as what our current ones do. And they also have, they're non-mechanical, so you don't have issues with them freezing or being inaccurate. They also can do live reading. They have a live reading capability. There's a optional platform that the town could purchase that would allow customers the ability to have live reading right to an app on their phone. And customers, residents could actually set up alarms where if there's any irregular activity with your water usage, you'd be notified, which is excellent for people who, might move down south in the wintertime or are just on vacation for a week during the winter when it's really cold, that they'd be notified, the town would be notified if you ever had a leak or a break in your system, and you could fix it faster and thus eliminate the loss of water. So really, it's actually pretty interesting new technology and longer lifespan. So we're hoping that we'll have support on that article. And again, this year's the initial phase 1, $370,000. $200,000 of it is from free cash, $170,000 from the water enterprise retained earnings. So no interest involved in, no borrowing, no interest involved in that capital item. And then lastly, I'll talk about the Nahant DPW front end loader. So this is a tractor with a front end loader. We use, again, this is part of our fleet schedule. It's replacing a 2013 front end loader. What we use this for is to load material in the yard. We use it to rake the beaches. We use it to mow fields. It's kind of a multi-use piece of equipment. And we're proposing full funding through free cash, no borrowing again. I have a question in the chat. The new meters, do they have a cybersecurity rating or evaluation? I don't know. I'd have to look that up. But they don't connect to your internet. The communication of the meters or the data from the meters is done through a different frequency. It does not connect to your internet. So there wouldn't be any cybersecurity issues of being able to access your network in your home. But I'd have to try and get an answer on cybersecurity rating or evaluation. Also, Brendan, I don't know if I answered your question or if I fully understand it, but feel free to shoot me an email and I can ask the folks at Camstrup if they have an answer for you. Community preservation articles, there are a number of them. Not all of these are are applied by the town of Nahant. Some of these come in through other organizations or committees. So here's the full list of them, and I get into a few of these in the following slides. But the first is the Flash Road Recreation Master Plan. Heritage Trail at Goddard Drive, better defining the Heritage Trail at Goddard Drive so that it isn't encroached upon when the properties up at the Coast Guard housing get sold. Little League field lighting, housing development study at Greystone Road. That's probably going to be the largest discussion at town meeting. Bailey's Hill, Fort Ruckman reclamation. This has to do with invasive vegetation removal and maintaining the trail system and the natural environment in that area. ADA beach access improvements. I talk about that a little bit too. Johnson School, Boulder Scramble. And the rest of those are articles that you'll see every single year. They're just more like administrative type stuff. So the Flash Road Recreation Master Plan, let me start with that one. This yellow outline of the entire property is to help illustrate what we're talking about, the area that we're talking about here. Following up on the heels of the Open Space Master Plan, Open Space and Recreation Master Plan, which looked at the entire town. This is a more focused study on this particular area. We've recently rebuilt the basketball court and tennis pickleball courts. As I mentioned, we're looking at lighting improvements at the Little League, but there are a number of other items that need attention or deserve attention or that we're looking for community feedback on. So this funding would be to hire a consultant to help us go through a public process, to do mapping, to do some data work, and look at this entire property, what its needs are, and kind of develop a master plan specifically for this property that will help guide the town in the future on capital improvements. I have some items listed here. The Heritage Trail, which is in green. In FY23, there was a CPC grant approved by the town meeting for $11,000 to improve the Heritage Trail through this area. As you can see, there's only one small section of it that's really defined by trees behind the DPW yard. That actually takes a left and goes towards the community garden up to Goddard Drive and into Bailey's Hill. If you walk the other way, eventually you get to the crossing on Flash Road up by the playground. But, from the playground crossing all the way to the garden, it's really an undefined trail. And so, the effort of that article was to more clearly define, that trail and how it works through this property. And what we've decided to do is work with the Johnson School who brought that forward, and say, well, why don't we look at this entire property? Things could move, things could change, and then work the Heritage Trail within that. So it's part of this process. Parking is another issue. Squaring off and enclosing the DPW property is an issue for the town. Currently, people walk through there with baby carriages and pets, and it's an active yard with heavy equipment. So certainly a liability for the town. We need to fix that as well. So there's kind of a number of things that we want to look at, and we said, hey, why don't we do a more in-depth process of this entire area and see what the public is interested in, and maybe we'll add some other things that aren't labeled on this slide, but that's kind of how we got here with this one. Nahant Little League, Article 20C. This is $75,000 from CPC. There's $45,000 of matching funds and in-kind services contributing to this project from the Little League, which totals about $120,000. There actually was lighting. You could see the old poles at the Little League field in the past, and I don't know when they stopped working or when they were stopped being used, but they don't work anymore. And what we want to do is bring that lighting back so that there can be the Little League and or anyone else that might want to rent or use the field can enjoy the lighting. Late games, Friday night lights, Saturday night lights, summertime games, and create that additional recreational venue for the community. All electrical costs would be transferred to the user of the field during that time. And as I mentioned, a significant contribution from the Little League itself towards this project. Article 20D, Housing Development Study, Grayson Road. As I mentioned, this is going to be probably the more discussed article at town meeting. This is $60,000 to look at the lower portion of Greystone Road. It was born for housing. Or additional residential property. This was born from the housing production plan process. So throughout last year, the town was going through the housing production plan process. That was pretty much, it was scheduled or came to its final stages at the end of the last calendar year, at the end of 2024. And then this last leg of finalizing the plan and getting it over the last hurdle is and adding public comment processes has added months of to the timeline. But it was, back in, like I said at the beginning of the slideshow, it's in January when you start applying for the CPC grants. So we applied for this grant back in January, and here we are. So what this would do, let me say this, it would not authorize the sale of the property. It would not authorize the development of the property. What it authorizes is a study. And through that process, if the study developed something that the community was in favor of, it would then need to go to a town meeting vote to pursue it. I've met with a lot of people about this article. There's so many questions that I've received, so it's hard to really talk through all of them. Ultimately, if this gets approved and the town isn't able to produce a proposal that is successful at town meeting, nothing changes here. Through the HPP process, there was a lot of discussion about, the town has low income housing. It obviously has market rate. It has high income. What it doesn't have is middle income housing or senior housing or veteran housing or first home buyer type opportunities. And so that's really what the committee or what the town has been focused on and would be looking to, discuss with the community if this funding gets approved. There's a lot of specifics about how many units, what would they look like, who would they be for, how would the traffic be impacted, all that stuff. All those questions would be discovered through this process. So I know there's a lot of concern from the neighborhood and, that this is the town's attempt to maybe add a number of low-income units or something along those lines, but that's actually not what the town has in mind. But ultimately, it's up to the residents as to what they would be okay with happening here. Think about the Coast Guard housing property and that process. Back in 2008 or 10, there was a study process to determine what the community was hoping to accomplish with the redevelopment at that property. At that time, it was approved to do a condo building and townhouses with 25% of the units being reserved for an 80% median income, helping the town meet the 40B requirements. That ultimately never came to fruition. Over the next 10 years, the town did a similar process again and ultimately decided we're going to, go to the town to sell these as individual market rate lots. And that's what we're doing now. So it's kind of the same idea where this is the start of a conversation where the town can discuss, what type of, development could occur here. I'll stop there, and in case anyone has any questions or comments on this article. All right, so if not, I'll just recap, I guess, and say, there's the town has through the housing production plan process, hearing from the public that attended or contributed or responded to surveys, there are certainly housing needs in our town. Like I mentioned, senior, veteran, first-time home buyer, little to middle housing, giving people the ability to downsize but stay in town. There's a large range of housing needs. There's also a financial need too that comes with housing. As I mentioned before, our primary source of funding in our community is residential tax base. So adding residential property helps bring more money into the town that helps pay for the capital needs and operational expenses. So there's housing needs, and then there's housing requirements. There's the 40B requirement, which has been on us since the 1950s. And then there's the 3A zoning requirement, which doesn't really say anything about affordability. It's just multifamily zoning. That process we haven't gotten into yet. We're going to get into that process this summer. The 3A requirement of multifamily zoning, the town doesn't need to comply with that until the end of next year. So the idea or the strategy of the town is to work through the process and prepare ourselves to have a vote, but likely not take that vote until we have to. So it may not be until next town meeting or a special town meeting in the late months of 2025. If this article passes, we probably won't get into this study right away because we still have to finalize the HPP, and then we're going to get into MBTA 3A multifamily zoning. So we're hoping that the town will approve the funding so that we can get into that study later. And again, really kind of work with the community on, what we could potentially do here. And obviously a large comment that we've heard or concern is drastic change to the community. That's not what we've discussed in public meetings. It's not really a desire. Ironically, it's the opposite. I don't want to overstate the threat of unfriendly 40B development or overstate the threats that come with non-compliance of 3A. Both of those things are there are risks involved, and we'll talk about that more at town meeting of not complying with either one. But it's up to the town, to determine whether they want to make progress towards compliance. The risks of non-complying and potentially unfriendly development, which again, there's never been really a threat to the town from at this point of an unfriendly development. So you be the judge on how big of a threat that is, but it is a risk. And in that scenario, the town doesn't have any control. That could be a drastic change to our community. So ironically, if you are opposed to this article because you think it's an attempt to drastically change the community, or that the housing production plan is in an attempt to drastically change, it's actually the opposite. The town is trying to present solutions to the community to consider so that we control our fate and do it the way that we feel comfortable doing it. And then if we eventually comply with both of those risks go away. So, we don't think that the right approach is to solve this either 40B or 3A necessarily in one neighborhood. It'd be better to kind of spread it around and do it thoughtfully, and that's kind of the evolution of how we got here and what we're proposing. So we'll see how it goes at town meeting. And like I said, I can answer questions now or Friday, or wait till town meeting. Let me check the chat. 40B has been in existence since 1969, 55 years. Thank you for the correction. Zoning, not actual correct construction of multifamily housing. Correct, B. So again, we'll get into the MBTA multifamily zoning requirement this summer. We're not voting on anything related to that at this town meeting. And we don't need to comply with that until the end of 2025. So even though we're going to go through the process this summer, it's such a complicated discussion that it's going to take time for us to, come up with a solution that we feel is right for the town. But we don't need to vote on it until we don't need to comply until the end of 2025. But yes, it's actually just zoning. And zoning, we're not required to zone property that is currently not developed. We can zone property that's already has housing on it. The somewhat unique part of Nahant is the town is completely zoned as single family zone, except that the small business districts that we have. However, there's more. So our requirement is zoning for 84 units of multifamily. There's well over 84 units of multifamily housing in existence in Nahant that's, I guess, considered pre-existing non-conforming. So even though multifamily exists, it's not zoned for multifamily. It's actually zoned for single family. So if you look at, this property right here, the Spindrift, Edge Hill, Bass Point Apartments, Rockledge, Anchorage, the properties on Nahant Road, but down in the business district there, those are multifamily properties, but they're not zoned as multifamily. And the MBTA 3A law allows us to rezone those properties as multifamily, and we can even restrict it specifically to the characteristics that we're already used to. So if there's, if Edge Hill is, for instance, and I'm not suggesting that be the place we zone, but I'm just using it as an example, is a 3-story, building, we could say 3-story multifamily in this area. So it's there could be a compliance avenue for the town of Nahant that doesn't actually drastically change the town of Nahant at all, and just zones existing multifamily housing as a multifamily zone. Again, we're going to go through that this summer, encourage people to pay attention to that. And, our goal is to present a solution for compliance that the town is comfortable with. But ultimately, the town has to vote on that because it's a zoning article. Okay, Brendan, since this property is one of few undeveloped pieces of land in town, could this 60K for study be redirected to the town in general so undeveloped land can be left wild? Brendan, help me, if you don't mind coming off of mute, help me understand what you're asking. I want to try to be helpful in responding to that. This is CPC money, so it has to be used for housing, recreation, open space, or historic preservation. So, you couldn't just you couldn't take this 60 grand and transfer it to the town funds. It's controlled through the CPC process. Yep, you there, Brendan?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I had to put headphones in. So I guess it was because I know that this particular article is geared specifically towards studying Greystone Road. So that's why I was wondering if there's any mechanism in order to make it just for the town in general. Just my personal feeling is we have undeveloped land, and I'd prefer to try to keep undeveloped land and just focus on redeveloping existing developed land so that we can maintain some of just the wild portions of town.
So, yeah, so I guess I don't think technically the way that you asked your question, I think the answer is no, because it's CPC money and it's very specific for what you apply it for and if it meets the criteria of the CPC. Not technically and not exactly what you're asking. Can the town spend money on protecting undeveloped land?
No, more of like if we're going to be studying, options for housing developments that, could we exclude the, what little undeveloped land we already have in town? Because once it's gone, you're not going to get it back. So, and just focus on redeveloping existing land in town. That's where I would say my particular concern is.
As opposed to this lot, you mean?
Yeah, because my understanding is this lot is for the most part it's undeveloped. There is some structures on there, but it's pretty much, if there's animals and critters there, they're living there.
All right, so there's I mean the unique part of this property is it's an old quarry. It's mostly stone, hard bedrock underneath the whatever earth there is there. It's not being used as open space or parkland or recreational space. As you said, yeah, sure, there are animals there or wildlife there, and we'd have to account for that if we were to redevelop it in any way. And we would, I guess, answer those specific questions on how to deal with that through the process of the study if it gets approved. The attractiveness of this property is that it's publicly owned. The only publicly owned property. When the housing production plan looked at, okay, here are the housing needs or desires of the community, and here are the requirements, 40B and 3A, and how could we potentially advance those goals, well, let's look at properties that could potentially do that. You look at public properties, you look at private properties. Obviously, public properties have less constraints in some aspects because they're publicly owned versus privately owned property that the town doesn't control. When we looked at the public properties that the town owns, this one had the least amount of constraints. And it's attractive because it is, you can, it's not being used for any other purpose. It would be adding residential property in a residential neighborhood. The traffic situation is rather easily solvable by allowing access to this area from Nahant Road or from the bottom of Greystone Road without, adding traffic on High Street or higher end of Greystone Road. So there are a lot of benefits to this property, but again, it would be, the size, how many units, what it would look like. That would, all those questions and details would come up, would come from this study, from, meeting with the community and the neighborhood and understanding, what the, where the limits lie.
Well, I guess my concern is the $60,000 to study this one particular property, to go through this evaluation process worthwhile if we get to the ultimate conclusion we want to keep, the few remaining wild places in the haunt as they are and just focus on redeveloping existing land. Like once we lose the spots that nature has reclaimed in our town, because the town was clear cut at one point, so we lost all the trees and everything's regrown. So like if we develop these few remaining rewild spots, it's not going to come back. We're not going to then start buying homes just so we can make forests. Unless the ocean starts knocking down homes and we don't allow people to rebuild, we're not going to be adding any more wild spaces to the town itself. So, maybe we want to take one of the few remaining spots off the table and focus our attentions elsewhere in town. So that's why I'm asking, could the money just be used?
It's a balance. I think it's a balance. But, certainly your opinion it matters. And that's why I say, if the town were to approve this study, and if the town were to pursue the action of attempting to sell or develop it, that would require a town meeting vote. And that's where you would express that difference in opinion. But I think it's a balance. I think the housing production plan looked at, a lot of the undeveloped property in town and, didn't approach properties that, held a lot of those important characteristics that you talked about, which also, kind of are parallel or line up with or overlap with a lot of additional constraints for development. Like the compost yard, low-lying areas that along the Heritage Trail, obviously open space like, Bailey's Hill, East Point, the golf course, all those open space areas that, or forest areas, were, I guess, not, those areas are the ones that we're not looking at. This one, doesn't have as much of the, I guess, characteristics that you're talking about. It doesn't, it's not that large. There's not a lot of adjoining, I guess, forest land to this. It's in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So it's not as valuable, I would say, as a natural area for what you're talking about as compared to, say, the conservation land of, like the lowlands where the Heritage Trail is or where the dump is, or, those types of things. So it's a balance, it comes down to a balance. And there are, like I said, there are housing needs as well for the town. So as a, you're certainly, your opinion is definitely something that we've heard, and you'd be, you should voice that opinion, at town meeting or at a future town meeting if this moves forward.
All right, I certainly will. I think ecologically wise, these be called oases.
A what?
An oasis,
An oasis.
because
Okay.
everything around is built up and developed. So this is one of the few spots that'd be, in a sense, it's an oasis.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. B, you wrote in the chat, and ADUs could help. ADUs are, if the housing production plan 40B and 3A and this CPC study weren't complicated enough, ADUs add a whole nother level of complicated discussion. They were something that was brought up during the housing production plan process. I expect them to be a large part of the MBTA multifamily zoning discussion this summer. And the state legislature has legislation pending related to ADUs to make them as of right or by right. Another legislative, I guess, housing attempt or effort. Even if they made them by right, towns would obviously be allowed to make local rules and regulations. It could help. They would qualify. I believe they would qualify towards your 3A compliance. Would it be necessary for the town to Nahant? Probably not, because we have other, like I said, there's so much existing multifamily housing in town that we could probably just rezone and be done with it. But it's something that people are definitely interested in, and may want to see us pursue or at least explore. Again, our role really is to take all that information in, work with consultants and experts from the state, understand what's the best way to do it. Our zoning is it needs attention anyways, and so I think it'll need a lot of technical work to understand how ADUs would fit in there. It's not impossible, but I don't know what the general feel of the community is on whether they be in favor or not. And as I mentioned, the legislature might, come over the top and allow them by right on the, which adds another complicated element to the discussion. So housing, as if I've painted a picture, the housing topic is it's wide range. There's many different layers. And it's complicated. So, hopefully I'm answering some questions as best as I can, but, encourage people to be part of the process this summer and pay attention to, those community meetings. Moving on to Article 20F, ADA beach improvements. We applied for $50,000 to fund ADA compliant beach mats and potentially purchase some ADA wheelchairs, beach wheelchairs. We if approved, our plan is to really kind of test drive where these mats might work best at select public beaches. And we still have to work out, if approved and we purchase the wheelchairs, how the logistics of how to make them accessible for the public, whether that be a pre-reservation system or a self-service kiosk type scenario. But there's where we've heard a lot from residents about the challenge of accessing our public beaches for those who are, um, have trouble traversing soft sand or, being able to get down to the water. So it's not, it's one of those things that we probably can't solve all the ADA issues related to beach access, but this hopefully, if approved, will help improve our situation in town and help people enjoy the public beach. And I think this is my last slide. There's two articles related to stormwater. One of them is sponsored by the town, Article 25, and one of them is came through by way of a citizen's petition. The one for the town is for $500,000, and it's actually to do stormwater work town-wide. So study work, engineering work, capital improvements, infrastructure improvements, but we have a lot of neighborhoods in town that are vulnerable to flooding from heavy rains or coastal flooding. The citizens petition article is specific to the lowlands and specific to a few items. And we view that article as problematic because we're not really sure where the $800,000 figure came from. The first alternative 1 and alternative 2 is language that came from a study that we performed on the lowlands neighborhood. So if you might recall, over the last, since 2018, there's been multiple articles supporting funding to look at stormwater issues in the lowlands neighborhood. To date, we've spent about $825,000 on study work, engineering, and now construction happening in the lowlands area. And actually, that neighborhood is, I would say, improved significantly because of all that work. There's still more to do. But in the study work, there were multiple alternatives suggested. Alternative number 2, as you can see, it says lowland stormwater system improvements, including the addition of storm drains, catchment areas, curbing. All that work is happening now, and it's funded through previous articles. So it's not necessary to ask for funding for that work because it's already funded and it's already happening. Alternative 1, which is lowlands 18-inch outfall restoration and constructing a permanent fixed pump for that outfall pipe. That is an alternative that was explored through the study, but at a very, very high level. Adding outfall pipes to the ocean nowadays is a lot more complicated than it was in the past because of permitting. There's certain treatment that is required. It's very expensive. Also, electric permanent pumps can't perform what a portable diesel pump can do, which is what we currently use. So in emergency situations, we're allowed to pump from the stormwater system out to the beach in order to reduce flooding that's occurring. Only in emergency situations, though. It's not something that can happen on a regular basis. There used to be an 18-inch outfall pipe in this area, but it hasn't been active in many, many years, probably since the 70s. It's actually unknown. And long story short, restoring that outfall pipe in a permanent capacity, we don't know if it's feasible, if it's permittable, or what it would cost. So we don't feel comfortable asking for funding for that at this point. Like I said, this came in through a citizen's petition, so we're at the $500,000 in Article 25 is more general and would allow us to do, additional work in the lowlands, but also look at other neighborhoods, like Willow Road, at the end of Emerald, White Way, Bass Point Road, Furbush Road, bottom of Summer Street. All those neighborhoods experience significant flooding, whether it's coastal or rainwater. And so, odds are their stormwater system is inadequate, undersized, dated, corroded, might need improvements. We discovered that through the study work in the lowlands, and that's what we're fixing now. So we're kind of trying to make a step towards the other vulnerable areas in town with that article. That's it. That's the whole presentation. Is anyone on? Did I miss an article that you wanted to talk more about, or did you have any other questions about the articles I did talk about? Michelle?
Hey, thanks, Tony. Michelle Capano, 29 Ocean Street. Tony, earlier in the presentation, you reviewed the omnibus budget. You said about 9% of our increase in insurance is our biggest expense that we're seeing year over year. Can you help me understand, in terms of all the different insurance costs that we have, where does our insurance committee sit in helping guide you and the town accountant through the process? How do we be able to go out and more competitively bid for health insurance, for all the different insurance products that the town needs, so we can try to, mitigate some of these increases? Just like a homeowner, right? Some of us are very loyal to our insurance companies. We may get, some benefits when you combine home, auto, life, and some other products. If you're self-employed, you may have some business insurance and some of that. What are we doing if we are with 10 different insurance carriers? How can we, try to find and, some savings in that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it hasn't been year over year. This year was significantly more than I've seen since I've been here. When I first came in 2018, so I think going into 2019, we approached Maya, which is our main insurance provider, about we wanted to explore alternatives, and we were able to secure a significant cost savings just by asking, just by broaching the subject. The challenge is that if we funded, health insurance specifically, but even property insurance, legal liabilities, things of that nature. If we tried to do that stuff on our own, it would be significantly more expensive. So what our community does, along with many other communities, is we're part of a regional approach where our, health insurance, it's part of a network of all of like Essex County. I don't know if it's exactly all of Essex County or some other communities are involved in that too. So it's almost like it's like a regional approach, which helps produce savings. So, um, I don't think the insurance committee, back to your question, I don't think the insurance committee has actually been active at all. It's since when I first got here. And even then it was only, I think, one person that was really looking at it closely. It wasn't really a committee of folks.
Okay. Is it something, so I guess I'm not well versed or familiar in terms of their charge. Is that something that, like FinCom, there are periods where, like annual enrollment is usually in the fall between, September and December. Is it something that they start in the summer and say, okay, what can we do to help, bring some of this
Yep.
activity in alignment so we're prepared for any increases or decreases, frankly?
Mhm.
Are there other, insurance products that we are investing in, and can we go out and, get more competitive bids on them?
Mhm.
Um,
Maybe. Um, I
I
will
mean,
say that we take advantage, like our insurance, there are incentives to reduce the cost of insurances, like paying your annual assessment upfront, um, doing certain type of trainings, employee trainings,
mhm,
uh, doing proactive building assessments, things of that nature that they actually will fund those efforts. So we take advantage of as much of that as we can, which then results in cost savings for the town, specifically for the town Nahant. So we do a lot of that already. Um, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I think for the size of our town and I think in general, just health insurance and liability insurance, or property insurance just went up for everybody across the board in this past year. I don't think it's unique to our providers, but certainly, exploring alternatives wouldn't hurt. I doubt it would hurt us. Um, so I guess that's an off the top of the head response of,
no, it's
yeah,
okay.
look
I
at
think
it
it's
more
just,
closely and
I think
maybe.
once you close the cherry sheet, and then you start thinking about, and fortunately, I hope you get a summer vacation at some point. um, this is, you add to the to-do list and say, okay, how can we address our insurance costs more differently?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you so much for all those that have tuned in, either by Zoom or watching on their TV at home. I hope this is let's see. Yeah. I hope this was helpful. I hope this helped prepare you for town meeting. We have books here at the town hall. It's available. There are also electronic copies available on nahant.org. And again, Friday, if you would like to stop by and talk more, please feel free to do so between 10 and noon. And otherwise, please attend on Saturday and look forward to seeing you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.